Hello, this is Maria Williams. Today I'm making a Happy Thanksgiving card with the color layering bundle from Hero Arts called Grateful Leaves and Distress Oxide Inks. This is the first video I'm filming on my new Tim Holtz Tonic Studios glass mat, so we'll see how it goes. Here is the Grateful Leaves bundle from Hero Arts. I like this set because you have solid images for the background and you also have stamps for the veins of the leaves, so I think they get a little bit more realistic look, which is why it is so ironic that I had to refilm this video, because on my original card I forgot to stamp the veins and I was totally completely done with the outside of the card before I realized that. I'm using 3 Distress Oxide ink colors, and this was my first version of the card. I was using Twisted Citron, Barn Door, and Spice Marmalade, and I usually will use Bristol smooth white cardstock, which is pretty thick, but because I'm going to be cutting the die cuts and I'm doing multiple layers, I decided to use Neenah 80 pound, Neenah Solar White, so that's what I'm using here, and I wanted to see how these inks would blend. And for this project, I don't need the inks to be really well blended, so you'll see that the panel is going to look pretty splotchy, and you can see a lot of circles and everything, but you'll see how it won't matter in the end. So I'm just very quickly and kind of haphazardly adding the colors on and just kind of filling in the gaps. I'm making sure that I don't put too much of the same color too close together. I do want to make sure that I have some gaps. But other than that, I'm just adding ink here and there very haphazardly. The more ink you add to the panel, the easier it becomes to blend because you have more ink that's not quite dry on the surface. So all the colors will blend more easily. And once I've applied most of the red and the orange, I am going back over all the colors with the green to make it a little bit more uniform. When I was done with the panel, I felt like it was a little bit too bright. So then I decided to take the crushed olive Distress Oxide ink and apply some of that all over the place, and I was a little bit happier with the way that looked, so I went ahead and finished the panel. To add a little texture, I filled my distress sprayer with some water and spritzed it onto the panel and set the panel aside to dry. Here's a quick look at the original card. I do like the way the colors turned out. I just wish I had stamped the veins, but since I was redoing the card, I thought that I would use a slightly different color combination. I thought maybe I could tone down especially the green. So I pulled out my sponges, and there you can see the Twisted Citron, and the crushed olive is the one that I put over the panel at the last minute, and I decided to switch over to Maud Lawn, which is a darker green. I ink blended my panel of Neenah Solar White 80 pound just like I did the original one, and I spritzed it with my distress sprayer, and then I put a couple of the leaves over the panel to see what they were going to look like, and I still wanted to tone down the colors a little bit more, so I took vintage photo distress ink and lightly added some ink to my sponge dauber and ink blended that all over my panel. I didn't want it to be too dark, just to tone down the colors a little bit. Here are the basic components for my card. I have an early espresso card base that's from Stampin' Up, and then a piece of white cardstock that's cut 1/4 of an inch smaller on both sides. I die cut a stitched rectangle die out of early espresso and a slightly smaller piece of bronze foil cardstock. Once the panel was dry, I took the 2 leaves from the die set, the maple leaf and the other one that looks the most similar to it. I know nothing about trees and leaves, so I couldn't tell you the name of the other one, but anyway, those 2, and cut out a bunch of die cuts, and I also cut 3 from the smallest leaf to use on the inside of my card. For the front panel of my card, I'm using 2 dies from MFT's stitched rectangle dies, stack 1, and this is the smallest of the 2, and I'm using it to mark the center of my card. This is where eventually I will cut out the center of this panel, and you'll see exactly how it goes in a little bit, but I'm just marking the outside of it, and I'm going to stamp the sentiment first, and then I'm going to figure out the placement of my die cuts. I'm using the Happy Thanksgiving sentiment from the stamp set, and I've already cut the Happy and the Thanksgiving apart. I don't want the whole sentiment on one line, I want it on two lines, and of course it's a lot easier to stamp each word separately. And I'm stamping the Thanksgiving first. I could have put both words on the same block, but I couldn't get them close enough. I felt like they were too far apart, so I'm just stamping them separately, kind of nestling the Happy amongst the T and the K so that it looks like one cohesive sentiment. Believe it or not, I started arranging my leaves on my card front without stamping the veins, but caught myself. And so I'm just taking the same early espresso ink and the two stamps from the set that are the veins for the two leaves that I chose, and just very quickly stamping them onto my die cuts. Because this was the first time that I was using these stamps, I did ink up the stamps and stamp on a scrap piece of paper before I started stamping on my die cuts. I also die cut a leaf out of the same bronze foil cardstock that I'm using behind the focal panel on my card. And to add a little bit of detail to it, I'm taking a mouse pad just because it's foamy. You could take the insert from a Misty as well. And I'm taking an embossing tool and I am just running it kind of hard along the front of the leaf to create a little bit of vein detail. I have figured out how I want to arrange my leaves on the front of my panel. So now I'm just taking this tube glue from Lawn Fawn and making sure that I'm putting enough glue on the leaves on each one and making sure that the tips of the leaves have enough glue on them because I'm going to die cut the center of this panel and then mount it onto a couple other pieces of cardstock. So I want to make sure that the small pieces that are in the center of my panel are not going to fall off once I die cut it. Once all my leaves are glued down, I'm just flipping over my panel and just taking some regular scissors and cutting the excess off. I had a couple of areas that looked a little too white, so I did use some of my scraps and kind of nestled them in there to fill in those areas. Next, I'm going to align the smaller of the dies that I'm using with the line that I drew earlier, and I'm going to run it through my Big Shot. All that I have left to do now really is assembly. I have all my pieces prepared. So I am gluing the front panel to the front of my card base, and I'm using liquid glue for two reasons. One's because I had it handy, and two, because it gives me a chance to move the front panel around and make sure that I have everything properly lined up. And then I'm going to take the bronze rectangle and glue that onto the early espresso die cut, and then I'm going to glue the center of the panel onto the bronze cardstock. For my little cluster of leaves on the front of the card, I am taking the two leaves that I saved earlier and attaching them with some foam tape. And then I'm taking the copper leaf and attaching that directly to the smaller leaf with some glue. I thought I might add a little too much dimension if I put some more foam adhesive, so I'm just sticking it straight down. To add a little bit of dimension to my front panel, I am using some foam adhesive on the back of the layers that I just glued together, and then I'm going to attach that to the front of the card. And I'm going to be careful to make sure that I align everything correctly so that the leaves look like they are one continuous leaf. Then I'm taking some burlap and I have already cut one of the edges off of it, and I'm going to pull one of the threads out. And I could have used some linen thread, but I find that this has a little bit more texture. It's kind of crinkled and it holds the bow better, and it also adds a little bit more texture. I'm going to make sure that I get the bow just right. I'm going to fuss with it a little bit and then cut off the excess and just glue it down to the front of the card with some of my liquid glue. That finishes the front of the card, so I'm going to move to the inside. I kept it pretty simple, so all I did was take the same early espresso ink and stamp this other sentiment from the same stamp set, and then I took those three leaves that I die cut and stamped the veins onto and glued them onto the inside of the card as if they were kind of falling. I once again use my liquid glue and attach the panel to the inside of my card. So that finishes off the card completely, and here is another look at the original card without the veins. I think those colors look really good too. I did decide to do a matching envelope, so I had to ink up another piece of cardstock and stamp my veins onto my leaf. And I just simply attach the leaf onto the front of the envelope with a little bit of liquid glue. I think it gives the recipient a little glimpse into what they're getting and gets them excited as soon as they get the envelope. Here's a look at the finished project. It's not too late to get those Thanksgiving cards made and mailed out, so get to it. Thanks so much for watching and have a wonderful day. For links to the products I used and still shots, please visit my blog at mariascardsandmore.com.